Royal cheers echo as the king journeys to Buckingham Palace. Streets that were usually calm and ordinary now buzzed with life. Flags of bright colors hung from windows, swaying gently in the soft morning breeze. Banners adorned the lamp posts, each bearing symbols that had been part of the kingdom for generations. Even the pigeons, perched on rooftops and statues, seemed to pause, as if aware that today was different. People began to gather along the streets hours before the royal procession was set to begin. Families arrived with children clinging to their hands, eager eyes scanning the horizon. The children's faces were painted with excitement. Some held tiny flags, others clutched balloons that bobbed in the air. Street vendors moved quickly among the crowd, setting up carts with snacks and drinks, hoping to share in the celebration. The aroma of freshly baked bread, sweet pastries, and roasted nuts mingled with the crisp morning air, giving the streets a festive charm. Among the crowd, whispers spread like wildfire. Everyone was talking about the king's journey to Buckingham Palace. Some spoke of how they had seen him once at a public event, while others shared stories they had heard from grandparents about the grandeur of past royal visits. No one wanted to miss this moment. Cameras and phones were ready, but more than that, hearts were ready. The people wanted to see the king not just with their eyes but with a sense of connection, as if they could feel the story of the kingdom moving through him. In the palace, the atmosphere was very different. The halls were quiet, polished floors reflecting the soft glow of chandeliers. Courtiers moved silently, preparing for the moment that the king would step out into the waiting streets. In his private chamber, the king stood before a large mirror. He was dressed in ceremonial attire, a blend of deep colors and gold trimmings that shimmered in the light. Each detail had been meticulously prepared: the sash across his chest, the polished buttons, the insignia that marked his authority. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Though many saw him as a symbol of power and tradition, inside, he felt the same nervous excitement that any person might feel before an important event. The king's mind wandered briefly to memories of his childhood. He remembered sitting at the palace windows, watching processions from afar, imagining himself one day taking part. Those dreams had felt distant then, but now they were real. Today, he would step out not as a child dreaming of glory, but as the monarch, carrying centuries of history on his shoulders. His thoughts were filled with the faces of the citizens waiting outside, and he wondered what they expected of him. Would he meet their hopes? Would he make them proud? Meanwhile, the streets grew more crowded as the morning passed. Tourists, curious to witness the royal event, joined local citizens. Photographers adjusted their cameras, seeking the perfect spot to capture history. Police officers and event organizers moved carefully among the crowd, ensuring that everyone was safe and orderly. Excitement hummed through the air like electricity. Strangers smiled at each other, sharing in the collective joy. A woman handed a small cup of tea to a tired child, while a man offered his seat on the low wall to an elderly citizen. Even in a city filled with thousands, a sense of community prevailed. Musicians stationed along the route began to tune their instruments. Trumpets gleamed in the morning light, drums were polished to perfection, and the soft strumming of strings floated in the background. Every sound added to the feeling that something remarkable was about to happen. From the palace's vantage point, the king could hear a faint murmur of this activity, a gentle reminder of the world waiting for him. Though he was surrounded by opulent walls and history, it was the people outside who gave life to the day. The king's advisors moved quietly around him, double-checking schedules and ceremonial details. They spoke in hushed tones, respectful of the moment. Each advisor understood the importance of precision and timing, yet there was also a shared excitement in the air. This was not merely a formal duty. It was a celebration of tradition, unity, and hope. The king listened to their words, nodding occasionally, but his attention was mostly inward, focusing on the calm he needed to carry himself with dignity. Outside, the city streets seemed to stretch endlessly with anticipation. Vendors called out their wares cheerfully, though many buyers were too distracted to notice. Children climbed onto parents' shoulders to get a better view, and friends greeted one another with wide smiles. Some had arrived before dawn to secure the best spots, while others had joined as the crowd grew, unwilling to miss even a moment of the day. Everyone, regardless of age or background, felt connected by a shared purpose: to witness their king's journey to Buckingham Palace. Time seemed to slow as the first hint of sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the city. The light reflected off polished windows and the shiny shoes of the royal guards stationed along the route. Shadows of the crowd stretched long on the streets, but the energy remained unshaken. Birds took flight, weaving above the gathering, their wings catching the early sun. It was as if the city itself had paused to take a deep breath, readying itself for the arrival of the king. At last a distant sound reached the crowd, the rhythmic clatter of hooves on stone. A hush fell over the people. Cameras were raised, eyes focused, and hearts raced in unison. The king's carriage was coming. From his chamber, the king could hear the faint echo of cheers growing louder with each passing moment. He straightened his posture, his hand brushing briefly over the polished handle of the carriage door. Everything had led to this moment. Years of preparation, centuries of history, and countless lives intertwined with the story of the monarchy. The king stepped closer to the carriage, pausing to take in a final look at the room he had known all his life. Servants and courtiers gave respectful nods, aware that history was unfolding. Outside, the first wave of cheers reached him in soft, distant echoes. He smiled quietly, a mixture of pride and humility. Today, he was not just a ruler of a kingdom. He was part of a living tradition, a symbol of continuity and hope for his people. As the carriage doors opened, a sense of anticipation rippled through the streets. The king took his first step toward the waiting public, his eyes scanning the crowd. Faces lit up at the sight of him, waving and shouting in excitement. Flags waved higher and the music swelled. The city, once quiet and expectant, now seemed alive with movement, color, and sound. Every moment, every cheer, every wave was part of a larger story, one that the king would carry in his heart forever. He climbed into the carriage, the polished wood gleaming in the sunlight. Horses snorted softly, shifting their weight as if ready to announce to the world that the journey was beginning. The king adjusted his posture once more, looking out at the citizens who had gathered in such vast numbers. There were tears of joy, smiles of admiration, and hands raised in greeting. In that moment, he felt the connection between the crown and the people, a bond that was invisible but unbreakable. The carriage doors closed gently, and the procession began its slow, majestic movement through the streets. People cheered louder, their voices echoing off buildings, blending into a chorus of excitement and reverence. The king leaned slightly forward, waving in acknowledgement, his smile steady and warm. He could hear the children's laughter and the occasional call of "Long live the king" above the general hum of the crowd. Each cheer reminded him of the responsibility he bore, but also of the love and trust that his people placed in him. As the carriage moved further along the streets, the city seemed to follow in rhythm with it. Vendors paused to watch, birds circled overhead, and the sunlight continued to bathe the buildings in gold. The king's heart swelled with a quiet happiness, knowing that this journey was more than a simple trip to Buckingham Palace. It was a celebration of unity, history, and the simple joy of shared human experience. Today, every person on the streets was part of something greater than themselves, and the king could feel it in every cheer, every wave, and every smile. By the time the carriage reached the next major intersection, the king was fully immersed in the moment. He observed the crowd with keen eyes, noticing small details, the nervous excitement of first-time viewers, the contentment of those who had seen many royal processions before, the children pointing to the flags and decorations with uncontainable wonder. He realized that these small human moments were as important as the grandeur of the ceremony itself. They were what made the day alive, what made history feel real. And so, the king sat in his carriage, ready to begin the most celebrated journey of the year. Every cheer, every wave, and every smile carried meaning. The city, the people, and the monarchy were united, if only for a day, in a shared story that would be remembered long after the sun set. The journey to Buckingham Palace was about to begin, but the memory of the early morning, the anticipation, and the quiet magic of the city waking up would remain forever etched in the minds of all who were present. The carriage rolled forward, its polished wheels turning steadily. Along the cobbled streets, the morning sun reflected off the gold accents on the carriage, sending glimmers of light dancing across the gathered crowd. Every sound seemed amplified, the rhythmic clatter of hooves on stone, the soft rustle of flags in the breeze, the excited murmurs of the people. The king sat tall inside, his eyes moving over the faces pressed close to the railings. He could see anticipation in every glance, in every smile, and in every wave of a small hand. As the procession moved through the streets, the city seemed to transform. Ordinary shops and houses, usually quiet and unassuming, had taken on a festive air. Windows were decorated with ribbons, shutters were painted in bright colors, and flowers filled every available space. Shopkeepers leaned out, waving to the king as he passed. Even the animals of the city seemed to sense the importance of the day. Dogs barked in excitement, pigeons flew in flurries overhead, and cats watched quietly from rooftops, their curious eyes following the glittering procession. The king's journey was not just about moving from one place to another, it was about connecting with his people. He waved frequently, nodding at those who cheered, and occasionally he leaned forward to acknowledge a child holding up a drawing of the palace. Each gesture was small, but the crowd responded with loud, enthusiastic applause. In that moment, the boundary between the monarch and the citizens seemed to fade. The king was not a distant figure on a throne. He was part of the living city, sharing its joy and witnessing its energy firsthand. Musicians along the route played lively tunes that echoed through the streets. Trumpets blared, drums pounded steadily, and the soft melody of strings floated above the sound of the crowd. The music added rhythm to the journey, guiding the footsteps of the horses and the flow of the procession. People clapped in time with the music, their excitement growing with each passing moment. Street performers, inspired by the celebration, joined in with acrobatics and dances, adding a touch of playfulness to the solemnity of the event. Citizens of all ages lined the streets. Elderly people sat on benches or leaned on canes, their eyes reflecting a lifetime of memories and pride. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders so they could see above the crowd. Teenagers waved enthusiastically, taking pictures with their phones, eager to capture the historic moment. Even those who had lived far from the palace all their lives had traveled into the city to witness this journey. For many, it was more than a ceremonial event. It was a connection to the history of their kingdom and to the person who represented it. Alongside the cheering crowd, the royal guards maintained order with quiet efficiency. They wore polished uniforms, helmets gleaming in the sunlight, and swords at their sides. Their expressions were calm and focused, yet even they could not hide the pride of being part of such an important day. Every step the guards took was measured and precise, a reminder of the discipline and tradition that had carried the kingdom through centuries. Yet beneath their stern appearance, there was an unspoken joy. They were witnesses to history in motion. As the carriage moved closer to the city's center, small incidents occurred, adding human warmth to the grand spectacle. A child dropped a balloon, and an older sibling rushed to retrieve it, waving it triumphantly to the king. A street vendor tripped slightly while balancing a tray of pastries, and nearby spectators helped him steady it. These little moments, ordinary and unplanned, reminded everyone that even on a day of ceremony, life went on in its small, beautiful details. The king noticed them all, and in his mind, he stored each smile, each gesture, as part of the living story unfolding around him. The king's thoughts drifted as he observed the crowd. He reflected on the people's loyalty and the countless lives that intertwined with the monarchy. Each person cheering represented a unique story, a family that had lived in the city for generations, a young artist inspired by the palace's beauty, a merchant whose business had thrived under the stability of the kingdom. The king realized that his role was not only to lead but to connect, to understand, and to honor the lives of those who looked to him for guidance and inspiration. As the carriage turned into wider streets, the excitement reached new heights. Citizens raised their voices together, creating a chorus of cheer that seemed to lift the very air around the procession. The sound echoed off the surrounding buildings, filling alleyways and courtyards with jubilation. Children's laughter rang above the hum of the crowd, blending with the music in a perfect harmony. The king smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. This was the moment he had imagined many times, but it was even more powerful in reality, full of life, emotion, and human connection. Along the route, city landmarks seemed to come alive. Historic statues were framed by waving hands and fluttering flags. Fountains sparkled in the sunlight, their water reflecting the gold and crimson of the ceremonial banners. Shops that had stood for decades displayed special decorations, and cafes opened their doors to let customers watch the procession from inside. Every step of the journey was a reminder of the city's history and its living spirit, a blend of tradition and everyday life that made the day unforgettable. The king's carriage passed a small school, where children had been released early to witness the event. They ran to the gates, their voices ringing out as they shouted greetings. Some held handmade signs, others waved tiny flags, and a few even sang songs they had practiced for weeks. The king noticed their enthusiasm, and for a brief moment he thought of his own childhood. He remembered standing in similar crowds, watching the city awaken to royal celebrations. The memory made him smile, and he waved warmly at the children, whose eyes widened with joy at the acknowledgement. In another part of the city, tourists had gathered, their cameras ready to capture the grandeur of the moment. Some were from distant countries, curious to witness the monarchy in action. They marveled at the precision of the guards, the elegance of the carriage, and the genuine excitement of the citizens. Yet as they observed, they realized that the celebration was not just about pomp and ceremony. It was about a community coming together, a city celebrating its shared history, and a king connecting personally with his people. The tourists took mental photographs as much as physical ones, knowing they were witnessing something truly special. As the procession continued, the king became aware of the subtle details that made the journey unique. He noticed an elderly man holding a small, worn photograph of a past monarch, tears glistening in his eyes. A young woman handed a flower to a guard, who nodded in gratitude before placing it carefully aside. A street musician played a soft tune on a violin, his notes rising above the bustling crowd. These small gestures, unnoticed by many, added depth and humanity to the day. The king's heart swelled with appreciation, for it was in these moments that he saw the true spirit of his kingdom, kind, vibrant, and alive. The carriage slowed as it approached the main square, where the crowd's energy intensified. People pushed forward slightly, eager to get a better view. Music grew louder, drums echoing in perfect rhythm, trumpets shining like beacons in the morning light. The king sat up straighter, feeling the anticipation grow with every step. The main square had always been the heart of the city, a place where history was made. and today it was filled with the collective voice of thousands. The excitement was contagious, spreading from one group to another, until everyone present was part of a shared heartbeat of celebration. For a moment, the king allowed himself to take it all in. He observed the faces of the people, their expressions of joy, wonder, and admiration. He listened to the music, the cheers, and the laughter. He felt the sun warm his face and the soft breeze that carried the scent of flowers and baked goods from the street vendors. The journey was no longer simply about reaching Buckingham Palace. It was about the experience itself, the connection between ruler and people, and the celebration of life in its most communal and beautiful form. As the carriage turned toward the final stretch of the route, the king could sense the crowd's excitement reaching its peak. Voices rose in unison, chanting greetings and applause. The sound was both overwhelming and uplifting, a testament to the unity of the city. Children waved enthusiastically, elderly citizens stood proudly, and young adults cheered with uncontainable energy. Every cheer, every smile, every wave carried meaning. The king felt honored, humbled, and deeply connected to his people. The horses picked up a steady, majestic pace, and the carriage moved closer to Buckingham Palace. Along the way, the king continued to observe small, heartwarming interactions among the crowd. Friends greeted each other across barriers, strangers shared stories and laughter, and families celebrated together. Each scene reminded him that while the journey was ceremonial, it was also profoundly human. It was a day where the ordinary and extraordinary blended seamlessly, where tradition met the present, and where every person played a part in the unfolding story. By the time the carriage reached the wide avenue leading directly to the palace, the city seemed to hum with anticipation. Flags waved, music played, and thousands of voices cheered in a wave of sound that felt almost alive. The king sat calmly, but inside he felt a deep joy and satisfaction. He understood that this journey, though ceremonial, was a moment of unity and celebration for everyone present. It was a reminder that a kingdom is not only defined by its history and traditions, but also by the people who live, love, and celebrate within it. And so, the king's journey continued, moving gracefully through the streets, every turn of the wheels carrying him closer to Buckingham Palace, and every cheer carrying the spirit of a city united in admiration and hope. The day was alive, vibrant, and unforgettable, a memory that would linger in the hearts of all who had witnessed it. As the royal carriage continued its steady journey, the city seemed to transform around it, becoming not just a backdrop for the procession but a living, breathing story. The king sat quietly, his hands resting lightly on his lap, eyes scanning the crowd as the carriage rolled forward. From this vantage point, he could see not only the excitement, but also the stories hidden in every face, the lives of ordinary people intertwined with the history of the kingdom. It was a humbling reminder that his reign was built not only on tradition, but on the loyalty, hopes, and dreams of the citizens he served. As the carriage moved through a long, narrow street lined with old brick buildings, the king's mind wandered to his own childhood. He remembered being a young boy, sitting by a large window in the palace, watching distant processions and dreaming of the day when he might be part of them. He had often imagined waving to the crowds, hearing the cheers, and feeling the warmth of people's admiration. Yet in those dreams the experience had always been distant, almost magical in its perfection. Now, as he moved among the people, he realized that the reality was far more profound than any dream. It was alive, unpredictable, and full of humanity. The crowd continued to swell, stretching along every street, alley, and corner the procession would pass. Citizens of all ages pressed close to the railings, waving enthusiastically and shouting greetings. Children ran to the front with handmade signs, some drawn with crayons and others carefully painted, depicting the palace, the crown, or the king himself. Their eyes sparkled with excitement, and their laughter echoed through the streets, blending with the music and the rhythmic sound of the horses' hooves. The king smiled softly, feeling a deep sense of connection. These small moments of joy were as meaningful as the grand ceremony itself. Along the route, small personal stories caught the king's attention. A young woman held the hand of her elderly grandmother, guiding her through the crowd to get a better view. A street vendor balanced a tray of pastries while keeping one eye on the cheering citizens, his smile betraying a mixture of pride and relief that the day had come without incident. A man lifted a child onto his shoulders, adjusting his hat so the little one could see over the crowd, while the child waved a tiny flag with fierce determination. Each small story reminded the king that the city was made up of countless individuals, each playing their own role in this historic moment. The music that accompanied the procession grew louder as the carriage approached a historic square in the heart of the city. Trumpets blared in bold fanfares, drums rolled steadily, and the soft harmony of strings floated above the crowd. Musicians played with precision and passion, their notes filling the air with energy and emotion. The king listened, allowing the sound to wash over him, a reminder that celebration was not only visual but also auditory, a shared experience that could unite people without words. He imagined how the music would linger in the memories of those present, long after the day had ended. As the carriage moved past familiar landmarks, the king's thoughts drifted to the responsibilities he carried. Every decision he made, every public appearance, and every interaction with citizens mattered. He remembered the times when the weight of the crown had felt heavy, moments when difficult choices had to be made, balancing tradition with progress, history with the future. Yet in that moment, surrounded by the cheers and smiles of his people, he felt reassured. The journey through the streets was a reminder of why he bore these responsibilities, for the people, for the kingdom, and for the living legacy of those who had come before him. In another part of the city, a group of children had set up a small display along the sidewalk. They had drawn pictures of the palace, painted crowns, and written messages of welcome to the king. Some of them shyly waved as the carriage passed, while others shouted excited greetings, their voices trembling with joy. The king noticed them, leaning slightly forward to offer a small wave and a warm smile. Their excitement reminded him that even the youngest citizens were part of this shared story, and that every smile, every cheer, and every small gesture mattered. The king also observed the older citizens, many of whom had stood along the streets for hours. Their faces were etched with lines of experience and history, each wrinkle telling a story of resilience, pride, and devotion. Some held old photographs, others clutched worn banners, and a few wiped tears from their eyes as the procession passed. The king felt a profound sense of gratitude toward them. Their presence was a bridge between the past and the present, a living connection to the traditions and memories that had shaped the kingdom over generations. As the carriage approached a particularly wide avenue, the crowd's excitement intensified. People pressed forward slightly, eager to catch a glimpse of the king, their voices rising in unison. Children's laughter rang above the hum of conversation, while the rhythmic beat of drums echoed like a heartbeat through the streets. The king felt a deep sense of humility as he looked at the sea of faces before him. He understood that his role was not simply ceremonial. It was a responsibility to lead, to connect, and to inspire. Every cheer, every wave, and every smile was a reminder of the trust his people placed in him. Along the route, small incidents continued to bring humanity to the day. A vendor's cart tipped slightly, spilling colorful candies onto the street, but nearby citizens helped him gather them, laughing and sharing the sweets with children. A child lost a balloon, and a kind stranger retrieved it, returning it with a gentle smile. These unplanned moments reminded the king that even amid the grandeur of ceremony, Life remained alive in its small, beautiful details. The people's joy was not just for the procession, but for the shared experience of being together, of participating in something larger than themselves. As the carriage turned toward a historic bridge, the king's thoughts wandered to the stories he had been told about previous monarchs. He imagined them walking these streets, feeling the same excitement and the same connection with their people. History was not only preserved in books or monuments, it lived in the faces of citizens, in the energy of crowds, and in the traditions that continued from one generation to the next. The king felt honored to be part of this continuum, a link between the past and the future, carrying forward the legacy of leadership and service. The city seemed to pulse with energy as the procession continued. Children waved their flags, parents lifted their little ones onto their shoulders, and strangers smiled at each other, sharing in the collective joy. The king noticed these small acts of kindness and connection, realizing that they were just as important as the official events of the day. Life, after all, was made meaningful not only by grand gestures, but also by the simple moments of human warmth. And today, those moments were multiplied thousands of times over. Musicians played a softer, more reflective tune as the carriage passed a quiet square lined with ancient trees. The gentle notes created a moment of pause amid the excitement, allowing both the king and the citizens to reflect. He looked at the crowd and imagined the stories behind each face, the hopes, dreams, and struggles that made each person unique. He felt a sense of responsibility not only for the present but also for the future, for the lives that would be shaped by the decisions he made and the example he set. By the time the carriage neared the city center, the king could feel the energy reaching its peak. People pressed closer to the barriers, shouting greetings, waving flags, and cheering with uncontainable enthusiasm. The air was filled with the combined sounds of music, applause, laughter, and conversation, a symphony of life and celebration. The king felt a deep sense of gratitude and connection. This journey was not just about reaching Buckingham Palace. It was about sharing a moment in time with thousands of citizens, each of whom contributed to the living story of the kingdom. As the carriage moved into the wide boulevard leading toward Buckingham Palace, the king reflected on the significance of the day. It was a celebration of tradition, history, and unity, but it was also a reminder that a monarchy's true strength lay not in its ceremonies or regalia, but in the hearts and minds of its people. Every cheer, every smile, every small gesture of joy was part of a larger story, a story of a city, a kingdom, and a king who walked among his people, listening, observing, and sharing in their lives. The king adjusted his posture slightly, leaning forward to wave at a group of schoolchildren who had been waiting for hours. Their faces lit up at the acknowledgement, and they waved back with uncontainable excitement. Elderly citizens clapped slowly, their hands moving with deliberate respect, while teenagers shouted with energy that seemed to echo across the city. Every reaction was a reminder of the bond between ruler and people, a connection that went beyond ceremony and tradition into the realm of shared human experience. The carriage continued its journey, moving gracefully along the avenue, every turn of the wheels carrying the king closer to Buckingham Palace. The sun shone brightly, casting warm light on the faces of the citizens and reflecting off the polished surfaces of the carriage and guards' uniforms. The king's thoughts were calm yet focused. He understood that every gesture, every wave, every nod of acknowledgement was part of a larger duty, a responsibility to lead, to inspire, and to honor the lives of those who looked to him for guidance and example. And so the king moved through the city, surrounded by music, cheers, and human stories. Every smile, every small interaction, and every gesture of excitement was etched into his memory. The journey was not merely a ceremonial procession. It was a living, breathing connection between a monarch and his people, a celebration of history, humanity, and hope. The king felt the weight of his responsibility, but also the joy and warmth of being part of a kingdom that celebrated life in its fullest, most vibrant form. The royal carriage moved steadily along the wide avenue, the crowd growing larger and more animated with every step. The sun shone brightly overhead, casting long shadows on the polished cobblestones, while the flags and banners waved proudly in the soft morning breeze. Every sound seemed amplified: the rhythmic clatter of the horses' hooves, the soft shuffle of footsteps in the crowd, the cheers and laughter echoing through the city streets. The king sat upright, calm and composed, though inside he could feel the quiet thrill of anticipation building. As the carriage turned a corner, Buckingham Palace came into view in the distance. The grand gates, tall and imposing, were adorned with the royal insignia, glinting in the sunlight. Crowds pressed even closer to the barriers, their excitement reaching a new peak. Children jumped on tiptoes, waving flags and calling out greetings, while parents lifted younger ones onto their shoulders to give them a better view. The king could see the mixture of pride, wonder, and joy on the faces before him, and he smiled warmly in response. He knew that today was more than a ceremonial visit. It was a moment of connection, a celebration of unity between the monarchy and its people. The route leading to the palace was lined with soldiers in ceremonial uniforms, their boots polished to a high shine, their helmets reflecting the sunlight. They stood perfectly still, swords in hand, maintaining order while adding to the grandeur of the procession. Their disciplined presence added a sense of rhythm and structure to the day, a reminder that tradition and precision were at the heart of the kingdom. The king's eyes followed their movements, appreciating the dedication and pride with which they performed their duties. Each soldier was part of the living story of the monarchy, a silent yet powerful symbol of loyalty and honor. As the carriage approached the palace gates, the crowd erupted into a chorus of cheers, clapping, and shouting. The sound echoed across the square, bouncing off nearby buildings and creating a wave of excitement that seemed almost tangible. The king raised his hand in acknowledgement, his smile steady and warm. He noticed the children holding up handmade signs, the elderly citizens waving worn but cherished banners, and the young couples sharing this moment of joy together. Every face, every gesture, added to the feeling that this was a day to be remembered, not just by those present, but by generations to come. The palace gates opened slowly, revealing the grandeur of Buckingham Palace in full view. Its tall columns, expansive facade, and ornate decorations reflected centuries of history and tradition. Inside the gates, palace aides and courtiers moved with quiet precision, guiding the carriage along the final stretch of the route. The king observed the scene with a mixture of admiration and humility. The palace, so familiar and yet so magnificent, symbolized more than power. It symbolized responsibility, service, and the continuity of history. Today, every step he took toward the palace would carry that symbolism into the hearts of the people outside. As the carriage moved closer, musicians positioned near the gates began to play ceremonial tunes, their instruments gleaming in the sunlight. Trumpets blared bold fanfares, drums rolled steadily, and the soft harmony of strings floated above the sound of the crowd. The music added a sense of grandeur and solemnity, yet it was tempered by the warmth and excitement of the people. The king allowed himself to take a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of the music and the energy of the crowd flowing into him. It was a rare moment when history, tradition, and humanity met in perfect harmony. The king noticed small details along the route that made the moment even more special. A young girl, no older than 7, held a single red rose and waved it eagerly as the carriage passed. An elderly man, leaning on a cane, smiled broadly and nodded respectfully, tears glistening in his eyes. A group of teenagers shouted with excitement, their voices rising above the general hum of the crowd. These simple gestures, filled with sincerity and emotion, reminded the king that the power of a monarchy was not measured in wealth or regalia alone, but in the loyalty, love, and trust of its people. As the carriage entered the palace courtyard, the king could see the full scale of the ceremonial arrangements. Guards stood in precise formations, their swords and shields catching the sunlight. The courtiers and aides moved with practiced elegance, ensuring that every detail of the ceremony was perfect. Flags and banners adorned the walls, and the palace itself seemed to shine in the morning light. The king felt a surge of pride, not in personal achievement, but in the collective effort of everyone who made this day possible: the citizens, the guards, the courtiers, and the musicians. Every person played a role in the unfolding story of the kingdom. The crowd outside the gates continued to cheer, their voices rising in waves of sound that seemed to reach the very sky. The king leaned forward slightly, waving to acknowledge the people who had gathered for hours to witness this historic moment. Children squealed with delight, elderly citizens clapped with measured respect, and young adults shouted in unison, their energy infectious. The king felt a profound sense of connection. This was a celebration not only of his journey to the palace, but of the unity, resilience, and spirit of the entire kingdom. As the carriage came to a gentle stop, the king prepared to step out. He took a deep breath, adjusting his posture, and looked once more at the crowd beyond the gates. Their faces reflected excitement, admiration, and a shared sense of pride. The king felt a quiet sense of responsibility settle over him, a reminder that this moment was not about ceremony alone, but about representing hope, continuity, and trust. Every cheer, every wave, and every smile was a promise between him and his people, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. When the carriage doors opened, the king stepped out gracefully, his polished shoes touching the cobblestones of the palace courtyard. The guards presented arms, their disciplined movements precise and elegant. The ceremonial music swelled, filling the courtyard with a sense of majesty. The courtiers and aides bowed respectfully, guiding the king toward the steps that led to the palace entrance. Every movement, every gesture was part of the carefully choreographed ceremony, yet beneath the formality, the king felt the warmth of human connection, the smiles, cheers, and admiration of thousands who had gathered outside the gates. As he ascended the palace steps, the king reflected on the journey he had just taken. From the crowded streets to the wide avenues, every moment had been filled with life, excitement, and emotion. He had witnessed small acts of kindness, joy, and celebration that reminded him of the true strength of the kingdom. The ceremonial pomp, while impressive, was only part of the story. The real story lay in the people, children, elders, parents, and strangers, whose presence and enthusiasm had made the journey unforgettable. At the top of the steps, the king paused briefly to look out over the courtyard and the gates beyond. The cheers continued, echoing across the open space, carrying with them the energy and spirit of the city. The king felt a deep sense of gratitude and humility. He understood that every decision he made, every action he took, and every word he spoke would impact the lives of those who had welcomed him with such warmth. Today was a reminder that leadership was not about grandeur alone, but about responsibility, connection, and service. Inside the palace, the king was guided to the throne room, where the final part of the ceremony would take place. The room was vast, its high ceilings and polished floors reflecting the sunlight streaming through large windows. Every detail, from the intricate carvings on the walls to the carefully arranged banners, spoke of history, tradition, and continuity. Courtiers moved with practiced grace, preparing for the formalities that would honor the king's arrival. Despite the grandeur, the king remained focused on the essence of the day, the people he served, and the shared story they were all part of. From the windows of the throne room, the king could see the city beyond the palace walls. The streets were still alive with energy, citizens waving, cheering, and celebrating. It was a living reminder that the kingdom extended far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace, encompassing every home, every street, and every heart that had come together to witness the royal journey. The king felt a profound sense of responsibility to honor that trust, to lead with compassion and wisdom, and to ensure that the connection between monarchy and people remained strong. As the final ceremonial steps were completed, the king took a moment to reflect quietly. He thought of the streets filled with cheering citizens, the children waving handmade flags, the elderly holding cherished banners, and the young adults shouting in unison. He remembered the music, the laughter, and the small acts of kindness he had observed along the way. Every detail was a reminder that history was alive, not only in monuments and documents, but in the lives of people who celebrated, hoped, and participated in it. And so, the king stood in the throne room, the journey to Buckingham Palace complete, yet the story far from over. The cheers outside would fade with time, the music would end, and the crowds would disperse, but the memory of this day, the connection, the celebration, and the shared humanity, would remain. It was a day that reminded the king of why he led, who he served, and the importance of every small gesture, every smile, and every act of unity that made the kingdom strong. The journey to Buckingham Palace was more than a ceremonial procession. It was a living story of tradition, connection, and shared joy. It was a testament to the power of human spirit, the strength of community, and the enduring bond between a king and his people. And as the king looked out over the palace windows, he knew that the memories of this day would remain with him, and with every citizen who had been part of it, for a lifetime. The sun began its slow descent, casting a warm, golden glow over Buckingham Palace and the surrounding city. The streets, once bustling with movement, had begun to calm slightly, but the excitement still lingered in the air. From the palace windows, the king could see the last waves of citizens as they slowly made their way home, their hearts full of joy and their voices still echoing faintly in the distance. Even as the crowd thinned, the energy of the day seemed to linger, a quiet reminder that the celebration was far more than a momentary event. It was a shared memory that would live on in everyone who had been part of it. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was alive with ceremony and preparation. Courtiers and aides moved gracefully through the halls, attending to the final touches for the evening's reception. Chandeliers sparkled above, reflecting light across the polished floors, and soft music played in the background, creating a harmonious balance between elegance and warmth. Despite the grandeur of the surroundings, the king felt a deep sense of calm. He knew that today had been a success, not because of the ornate decorations or the ceremonial pomp, but because of the people who had shared in the experience, celebrating not only the monarchy but the unity of their city and kingdom. The king stood by a large window overlooking the main square. From this vantage point, he could see the long shadows of the remaining citizens stretching across the streets. Some were still waving, hoping to catch a final glimpse of him, while others lingered in quiet reflection, savoring the memory of the day. The king's mind wandered to the countless faces he had seen, children with wide eyes, elderly citizens who had waited patiently for hours, young couples sharing laughter, and families creating memories together. Every gesture, every wave, and every smile had been part of a larger tapestry that made the day extraordinary. As evening approached, preparations for a formal gathering within the palace were underway. Guests from across the city and kingdom were arriving, filling the halls with conversation, laughter, and the gentle rustle of elegant clothing. The reception was designed not only to honor the king's arrival, but to bring together representatives of the people, the citizens, the leaders, and the ordinary families who had been part of the journey to Buckingham Palace. The king moved gracefully among the guests, exchanging warm words, smiles, and handshakes. His demeanor was calm and approachable, a reflection of the connection he had shared with the people throughout the day. Outside, fireworks began to illuminate the sky, their colors reflected in the windows of the palace and the eyes of the spectators who had returned to watch. Children pressed their faces against the glass, pointing excitedly at bursts of red, green, and gold. Elderly citizens nodded in appreciation, while families held hands, sharing in the spectacle together. The fireworks were not just a display of grandeur, they were a symbol of celebration, unity, and joy, a fitting conclusion to a day that had been marked by shared experience and collective pride. The king paused briefly on a balcony, looking down at the palace courtyard below. Guards stood in their precise formations, polished uniforms catching the light of the fireworks. Courtiers moved discreetly, ensuring that every detail of the evening proceeded smoothly. The king allowed himself a moment of reflection, thinking about the significance of the day. It had been more than a ceremonial procession. It had been a demonstration of the living bond between monarch and people. Every cheer, every smile, every small gesture of kindness he had witnessed had reminded him of the true purpose of leadership, service, connection, and the well-being of the kingdom. As the night grew darker, the streets outside the palace gates were still alive with lingering energy. People stood in clusters, discussing the events of the day, sharing stories and laughing together. Children recounted every detail to their parents, pointing to flags, banners, and the moments when the king had waved in acknowledgement. Parents smiled, remembering their own experiences from similar celebrations, and grandparents nodded, appreciating the continuity of tradition and history. The king could sense that the day had become a shared memory, one that would be told and retold, connecting generations and creating a sense of lasting unity. Inside, the king moved through the throne room, now filled with soft candlelight and the gentle murmur of conversation. Guests were sharing stories of the day, exchanging their experiences and impressions. The king paused occasionally, listening with interest, nodding, and offering words of appreciation. His presence brought a sense of calm and warmth to the room, reinforcing the connection he had cultivated throughout the day. It was not just a celebration of royalty. It was a celebration of the people who made the kingdom vibrant, resilient, and full of life. The king's mind drifted back to the moments that had stood out during the day. He remembered the child holding a small red rose, the elderly man with a cherished photograph, and the group of teenagers shouting with uncontainable excitement. He recalled the laughter, the cheers, and the music that had carried through every street. Each memory was vivid, a testament to the living spirit of the kingdom. The king realized that these moments, simple yet profound, were more meaningful than any ceremonial display or formal recognition. They were the heartbeat of the kingdom, the proof that tradition and humanity could exist together in harmony. As the evening progressed, the king found a quiet moment to reflect privately. Standing by a window that overlooked the city, he allowed himself to feel the magnitude of the day. The journey from the streets to Buckingham Palace had been long, filled with excitement, music, and human connection. Yet it was the small, unplanned moments, the smiles, the waves, the acts of kindness, that had made the day unforgettable. The king understood that leadership was not measured solely by titles, ceremonies, or displays of power, but by the ability to connect, inspire, and honor the lives of those he served. The palace staff moved efficiently around him, attending to every detail with quiet professionalism. Despite the grandeur, the king remained focused on the essence of the celebration, the people. Courtiers whispered updates about guests, music played softly in the background, and the aroma of evening refreshments filled the air. Yet even amidst the organized activity, the king's thoughts returned to the streets, to the faces of citizens, and to the simple joys that had made the day extraordinary. He knew that these memories would remain, not only in his mind but in the hearts of all who had witnessed the journey. Outside, the fireworks continued, their brilliant colors reflected in the windows of the palace. Citizens who had lingered watched in awe, pointing and laughing as the sky lit up in bursts of red, gold, and green. The music that accompanied the display blended with the natural sounds of the city, the distant calls of vendors, the laughter of children, and the soft murmurs of families sharing the spectacle together. For a moment, the entire city seemed to exist in perfect harmony, united by celebration, history, and a sense of collective joy. The king walked slowly through the reception, greeting guests, listening to their stories, and acknowledging their efforts in making the day successful. Every interaction reinforced the idea that the monarchy was not separate from the people but deeply connected to them. The citizens were not merely spectators of history. They were participants, contributing to a story that had unfolded over centuries and would continue for generations to come. The king's presence, calm and approachable, was a symbol of this connection, a reminder that leadership was about service, understanding, and empathy. As the evening reached its peak, the king stepped onto another balcony to address the gathering. The courtyard below was filled with citizens who had returned to witness the conclusion of the celebrations. The king's voice, calm and steady, carried across the square. He spoke not only of tradition and history, but of unity, hope, and gratitude. He acknowledged the efforts of the citizens, the courtiers, and the staff who had contributed to the day's success. Every word was received with applause, cheers, and smiles, a final affirmation of the bond between the monarchy and the people. The night slowly deepened, and the city began to quiet, but the memories of the day lingered. Citizens returned to their homes, carrying stories, photographs, and vivid recollections of the events. Children recounted their experiences to parents and grandparents, ensuring that the excitement of the day would continue to be shared. The king, now in the quiet of his private chambers, reflected on the journey from dawn to dusk. The procession, the streets filled with cheering citizens, the arrival at Buckingham Palace, and the evening celebrations had all combined to create a day that was both ceremonial and profoundly human. The king understood that the echoes of the cheers, the music, and the laughter would remain far longer than the events themselves. These were the memories that would shape the hearts and minds of the people, reminding them of the unity and pride that defined the kingdom. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not in personal glory, but in the knowledge that the day had strengthened the bonds between ruler and citizens, tradition and humanity, past and present. As the palace settled into the quiet of the night, the king allowed himself one last look over the city. The streets were peaceful now, the flags and banners still fluttering gently in the breeze. The fireworks had ended, but the colors lingered in the memories of all who had watched. The journey to Buckingham Palace, from the early morning anticipation to the evening celebrations, had been a living story of connection, pride, and shared humanity. The king finally retired to his private chambers, carrying with him the warmth, joy, and hope of the day. He knew that the memories of the citizens, the children's laughter, the elderly's proud smiles, and the shared excitement would remain in the city for a long time. History had been made, not in isolation but in the hearts of the people, with the king as a part of their living, vibrant story. And so, as night fell over Buckingham Palace and the city beyond, the echoes of cheers and laughter faded into the quiet, leaving behind a sense of unity, pride, and enduring legacy. The day had been a celebration not just of royalty, but of life, community, and the bonds that connect a king to his people. In that quiet, reflective moment, the king understood that this day would remain in memory and history alike, a reminder that true leadership is measured not by ceremony alone, but by connection, service, and the love of the people who make a kingdom whole.